What was the purpose of the New Zealand First Foundation if it's not to benefit the party?
Well, the reality of that is that's not a sub judice question, but we were only ever a discretionary beneficiary of the foundation, which means that were we not to exist, but the policies were to be found somewhere else, then they should be supported. And that is a serious legal distinction.
When you're talking about timing and questioning.
And that was the New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, there, speaking on the announcement this afternoon that the Serious Fraud Office has filed a charge of obtaining by deception against 2 defendants in the New Zealand First Foundation electoral funding cases. The charges were filed, we now know, on the 23rd of September. The defendants have interim name suppression, so can't be named or identified at this time, but the SFO has stated that neither defendant is a minister, sitting MP or candidate in the upcoming election or a current member of the New Zealand First Party. Winston Peters there saying he's been exonerated by this investigation and that they're actually taking the matter to the High Court. Obviously, this all relates to an investigation conducted by the Serious Fraud Office after the matter was referred to the police by the Electoral Commission in February. The Commission said it believed that the New Zealand First Foundation had received donations which should have been treated as party donations, and then they passed the matter on. Well, joining us now to discuss the latest developments is Otago University law professor Andrew Geddis. Good evening, Andrew. So Winston Peters and New Zealand First, are they utterly in the clear here, as Mr Peters maintains?
They're utterly in the clear in the sense of they haven't been charged with any criminal activity. Now, of course, if the bar for our politicians is, I am not a crook and I am not undergoing any criminal charges, if that's as much as we expect of them, then they've been, exonerated. But I mean, the reality is that the New Zealand First Party set up this foundation as a shadow way of gaining political donations, gaining the money to run the party. And now 2 of the people involved have been charged with criminal activity because it was clear to anyone who looked at this from the outset that what they were doing was in breach of electoral law, and they've been caught.
Andrew, I suppose we should clear up very early on in this discussion. The other thing that Mr Peters says is that we can't talk about this because it's sub judice.
Well, no, I mean, we can't talk about who is being charged. We can't speculate on that because there's name suppression. But in terms of, discussing the outline of the case, discussing the background facts and so on, I mean, those are all on public record. Sub judice is something that people throw around when they don't want to talk about an issue. It doesn't mean you can't talk about anything to do with the case.
So in terms of the charges that the 2 individuals are facing, obtaining by deception, I mean, what is at the core of this?
I need to be very careful because if I say too much, it may indicate who the individuals will be. But what it seems the Serious Fraud Office is saying is that the way that the money flowed into that New Zealand First Foundation breaches the Crimes Act and the provision of the Crimes Act that prohibits people from obtaining by deception. And I'm afraid I'm only going to say that much.
Understand. So let me ask another question then. Is this foundation and the way it is set up an unusual arrangement?
Yes. It's completely unprecedented. The New Zealand First Party has tried to draw similarities between its foundation and National Party, which has a foundation as well. But the National Party foundation is run completely in line with electoral law and is simply a way of gaining long-term donations which are then invested. This was a foundation where people would put money into the foundation rather than give it directly to the party. Because it was put into the foundation, it wasn't being declared to the Electoral Commission as the law required, and then the money was being spent on New Zealand First Party activities rather than the party spending its own money. So it was like a shadow parallel funding structure that paid no attention to electoral law, even though it ought to have. And now something's happened as a result.
Mr Peters, in his press conference there, saying that, he believes that the SFO has acted in an appalling way in the sense that this investigation has been underway in the lead-up to the election. In fact, he's comparing himself to Hillary Clinton being investigated by the FBI Director James Comey, and saying that by the time Hillary Clinton was cleared, it was too late for the campaign. Does he have a point about the timing of all of this?
Well, no, the SFO has to do its job. I mean, the SFO's job is to investigate whether crimes have been committed. And then once it's gained all the evidence to make a decision on that, to make an announcement, either someone's been charged or someone isn't. The SFO will have done its job as quickly as it could. It's had to do it all through the COVID crisis. We don't know how much assistance it was given by those who were being investigated, how much they may have tried to resist investigation and so on. And also we have to think of the opposite. I mean, what if the Serious Fraud Office had held off the announcement and then the day after the election or the week after the election announced that these charges were out there? Would the New Zealand public think that that was doing democracy a service? So, it's damned if it does, damned if it doesn't.
Is the New Zealand First Foundation and New Zealand First, the political party, are they two completely distinct entities?
The New Zealand First Foundation only exists because the New Zealand First Party board decided to set it up and to set it running. So it's very hard to say how these two things can be separate when it was the New Zealand First Party that decided it wanted to set this thing up, and then the New Zealand First Party benefited from the New Zealand First Foundation paying all its bills. So I don't care what technical legalities you may throw at it. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Because I suppose that's a really significant point, as Winston Peters has himself said in that press conference, that the distinction will be lost on some because he maintains that New Zealand First's, the foundation is completely separate, and that I suppose he's saying that his reputation and the party's reputation is being besmirched when none of them are charged. This is a separate, entirely separate entity.
Well, they probably shouldn't have set it up if they're worried about that. And if they're worried about how it operated and the fact that people have now been charged with how it operated, they probably should have paid a lot more attention about what it was doing. To sort of now go, oh my goodness, I'm shocked that there's, problems with this thing that we set up and we benefited from by it paying our bills, seems very, very convenient. And frankly, I don't buy it.
And again, New Zealand First Party has instructed its lawyers to issue proceedings in the High Court against the Serious Fraud Office. I mean, to what end?
Attack is the best form of defence, right? I mean, they have been, charges have been brought by this organisation, and so probably the best way to try to undercut the political impact of that is to try to make out that there's some wrongdoing or nefarious action by this organisation. So by filing the charges, they'll be hoping to change the narrative.
So obviously there are other investigations that are pending, as Mr. Peters has himself raised. Forget the legalities for a minute, Andrew, if you can. Do we need to review our donation system here?
Yes, it's pretty clear we do. I mean, we've had the National Party, one of its MPs, and we have to remember Jamie Lee Ross was a National Party MP when he was allegedly involved in laundering quite significant donations into the National Party. We've now got charges brought against a foundation that's very, very closely connected to the New Zealand First Party. We've got ongoing investigation into Labour Party fundraising, and we've got the mayor of our two largest towns under investigation for how they have raised money. Now, if that doesn't cause us to think that there's a problem or something needs looked at, I'm not quite sure what would make us think that.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Otago University law professor Andrew Geddis. And if you are just joining us, the SFO has announced it has filed charges of obtaining by deception against two defendants in the New Zealand First Foundation electoral funding case. Now, they have made the distinction that the people charged, none of them are ministers, sitting MPs or candidates in the upcoming election. None of them are current members of the New Zealand First Party. Those defendants have interim name suppression. And we heard just before from Winston Peters, who held his own press conference. The party has instructed its lawyers to issue proceedings in the High Court against the Serious Fraud Office. They're seeking a declaration that the SFO has abused its statutory powers and has been unreasonable.